President Trump strong-arming Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky into accepting a so-called peace deal that, well, is pretty much what Putin's been asking for all the way along.
He'll have to like it, and if he doesn't like it, then, they should just keep fighting, I guess.
Trump giving Ukraine 6 days to respond. But here are some of the concessions Ukraine must make. And as I said, these are things Putin's been asking for all the way along. That would give Putin Crimea. It would give Putin all of Ukraine's Donbass region, even though Russia does not control it. It would reduce Ukraine's military to 600,000 personnel, which is a cut of hundreds of thousands of troops, which of course would completely make them unable to fight Russia again. And it would bar Ukraine from joining NATO, which of course has been Putin's goal also.
President Trump said on Saturday that this plan was not his final offer. And I think that will be reassuring in some ways to those who view this 28-point proposal as essentially a Russian wish list. And many of the points do amount to the maximalist demands that the Kremlin has been making over the course of this war, including that Ukraine give up the entire eastern Donbass region, that it put a cap on the size of its military, that it give up some of its long-range weapons capabilities that it's been provided over the course of this war.
Europe just dropped a peace plan that has Putin absolutely spiraling, and the details are wild. While Russia's economy is literally collapsing, regions are going bankrupt, soldiers aren't getting paid, European leaders are standing firm with one clear message: Ukraine will not be forced to surrender. This new counterproposal completely eliminates Ukrainian capitulation as an option, and Russia's already rejecting it. You know what that proves? Russia doesn't want peace, it wants total surrender. But here's the thing, Putin is the one running out of time, and the numbers prove it. First, the troop cap issue. The original plan limited Ukraine's military to 600,000 personnel. The European counterproposal raises that to 800,000. And here's the crucial part, that cap only applies during peacetime. If Russia launches another attack, Ukraine wouldn't have to follow any restrictions whatsoever. Now, in my opinion, this specific point isn't the most important. Before 2022, Ukraine's military was only 250,000 personnel. Right now, it's around 900,000. But experts estimate that number will naturally settle to somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 once there's peace, simply because that's what Ukraine can afford to maintain. So a 600,000 cap was already generous, but 800,000 gives Ukraine significant breathing room. Now let's talk about the territory section, because this is where things get really interesting. The original American plan said that Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk would be recognized as de facto Russian territory, even by the United States. Kherson and Zaporizhia would be frozen along current front lines, and Russia would relinquish control of all other territories it's occupying inside Ukraine. Honestly, Ukraine could probably live with most of that. But here's where the original plan crossed a line. It asked Ukraine to give up the fortress belt it currently controls inside Donetsk. This is territory Russia has been trying to capture for 11 years and has completely failed to take. According to the American plan, this area would become a demilitarized zone, technically Russian, but with no Russian soldiers allowed. To give you perspective, the Korean DMZ that everyone knows about is roughly 2 miles or 4 kilometers wide. This proposed DMZ in Ukraine would be 40 kilometers, or about 25 miles wide. Absolutely massive and nearly impossible to manage effectively. More importantly, this area currently contains factories that are incredibly productive and valuable to both Ukrainian defense capabilities and the Ukrainian economy. The original plan wanted Ukraine to just abandon this industrial heartland and turn it into an empty buffer zone. That's essentially surrendering territory you're successfully defending. This is where Europe's counterproposal fundamentally changes the equation. According to the new plan, any territorial exchanges will only be discussed after a ceasefire is established. For now, there should be a ceasefire along the current front lines. Basically, Ukraine is willing to accept that Russia controls what it currently occupies. They won't recognize it as Russian territory, but they'll agree not to use military force to take it back immediately. But beyond that, Ukraine refuses to give up anything else, especially territory Russia hasn't been able to conquer. The European proposal also deletes several other problematic provisions. It removes the part saying Russia won't invade its neighbors and NATO won't expand further. It changes the requirement that Ukraine put in its constitution that it will never join NATO. Instead, the new proposal says that Ukraine joining NATO will be decided by NATO members themselves, according to existing NATO rules. Now, realistically, Ukraine joining NATO isn't happening anytime soon. Every single NATO member has to approve any new country joining, and that unanimous consensus doesn't exist. The United States is currently opposed. Even if America changed its position, Germany would likely object. And if not Germany, then definitely Hungary, which has consistently blocked Ukrainian integration into both the EU and NATO. So Russia doesn't actually need to worry about Ukrainian NATO membership in the near term. But the principle matters. Ukraine shouldn't have to constitutionally prohibit something just to appease Russian paranoia. Here's where the original American plan got legitimately comedic. It included a provision saying that frozen Russian assets, currently held mostly in Europe, about 80% of them, would be distributed with only $100 billion going to Ukraine for rebuilding. The rest would go to either the United States or Ukraine, but profits from the rebuilding would go to America. The problem? Europe wasn't consulted at all in writing this demand. Even though European banks are holding the actual money, European countries were rightfully furious, publicly stating that if you're making decisions that directly affect Europe, you need to include the countries that will execute those decisions. They were adamantly opposed to any Russian money going to the United States. That money should go to Ukraine for rebuilding, or it should go back to Russia, but only if Russia agrees to pay war reparations to Ukraine, which obviously will never happen. So realistically, all those Russian assets sitting in European banks will eventually go to Ukraine for reconstruction. But this situation highlights a critical problem with the original American plan. It included numerous provisions affecting European countries like Poland, Belgium, and Germany without consulting Europe at all. This is why Chancellor Merz publicly stated that Europe must be involved in any peace plan because it affects Europe far more than it affects the United States. The European plan also specifies that Ukraine will receive NATO Article 5-like guarantees, meaning an attack on Ukraine would be treated as an attack on NATO. Surprisingly, this was actually part of the original 28-point American plan too. The initial proposal mentioned security guarantees, and a supplementary letter explained these would mean that any extended Russian attack would be considered an attack on the Western alliance, with everyone reacting accordingly. Many people objected to that extended attack qualifier because nobody knows what that actually means. The European counterproposal removes that ambiguous language and gives Ukraine straightforward Article 5 style protection. Now, I know this plan contains many strongly pro-Ukrainian provisions, and some people are already saying Russia will never agree to it. That's fine. If Russia wants to negotiate, they can come to the table. Remember, even with the last plan, written by Putin's ally, Kirill Dmitriev, Putin said he wouldn't agree to it, but was happy to negotiate based on it. Well, guess what? Russia can negotiate on this plan too. According to a Bloomberg report, Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor weren't involved in writing the plan until the very last second. Even President Trump himself hadn't seen all the points until the last minute, but he gave it his blessing anyway. Now, it's important to note this is just Bloomberg reporting, not officially confirmed by the White House, but we do know some details are accurate because Dmitriev was heavily promoting the plan on social media. As soon as the European counterproposal came out, Russian media and Dmitriev were furious. Apparently, Ukraine having more ability to defend itself is somehow EU warmongering, according to Russian logic. I personally don't understand that logic. Maybe I need to drink more vodka or something. But here's something sad I recently learned. Dmitriev was actually born in Ukraine, but he sold his soul to Putin for money. Now he manages Russia's direct investment fund, which is sanctioned by the United States. And as a side hustle, he's trying to ensure Ukrainian children don't have a safe future. I guess that's the price you pay for access to the Kremlin. After Sunday's marathon negotiations, Secretary of State Marco Rubio made a statement. He said they arrived with 28 points, or 26 depending on which version, and successfully narrowed down the open items substantially. He called it probably the most productive day they've had on this issue, maybe in the entirety of their engagement. Certainly in a very long time. However, he emphasized that work remains, and he didn't want to declare victory prematurely. Now, this is where covering this news gets frustrating. As Rubio said, people are dying every day this war continues. But we need to remember, there is one country responsible for all those deaths, and that country is Russia. Russia started this invasion. I understand Rubio can't say that publicly while trying to negotiate with Russia. You can't antagonize someone you're trying to deal with, but hopefully everyone else still remembers who started this war. After the full day of negotiations, Ukraine and the United States issued a joint statement. The Ukrainian delegates insisted their concerns regarding security guarantees, territorial protection, freedom of navigation, and political sovereignty were all addressed. They also mentioned there's a new draft that reflects Ukrainian national interests and provides proper security guarantees for Ukraine's future. As of Sunday night, we didn't have that draft yet, so we don't know the specific details. The U.S. side reaffirmed their commitment to ensuring Ukrainian sovereignty, security, and future prosperity remain the main focus of the diplomatic process. That's definitely a positive statement considering where this whole thing started just weeks ago. The bottom line is this: Europe is standing firm. Ukraine is negotiating from a position where surrender is off the table. Russia's economy is crumbling while Putin demands capitulation. And despite all the chaos and conflicting proposals, there's actually progress happening in Geneva. Whether this leads to sustainable peace or just another frozen conflict remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: Ukraine will not be forced to give up what it successfully defended. Subscribe for similar content and let us know your thoughts in the comments.